Attention all F1 fans, McLaren are back. Alright fine, that might be a bit premature to say, but it certainly looks like McLaren could be on their way back towards the front of the grid. The team had a phenomenal result in their home race. So could McLaren be on their way back to the top? And how important is Lando Norris going to be in that rise? Buckle up as we take a look at whether Lando Norris can spearhead McLaren back to glory. Before we take a look at the future of Lando Norris, it's important to take a look back and see where he comes from. Born in Bristol, Lando Norris had exactly the right sort of upbringing to be an F1 driver, a rich one. His father is a retired pensions manager and one of Bristol's wealthiest people. It means that when a young Lando got into karting at 7 years old, his family had more than enough money to fund his promising career in motorsport. Having worked through the ranks, an 18-year-old Lando had a brilliant 2018 F2 season against a huge amount of future Formula 1 talent. He finished second in the championship just behind George Russell, but Lando had outdriven Alex Albon, Nick de Vries and Nicholas Latifi. Having been announced as a junior driver for McLaren in early 2017, it was no surprise that he was announced as the partner for Carlos Sainz for the 2019 season. Lando Norris is currently in his 5th season with the Woking team, and there have certainly been some up and down moments. His first season in the sport was impressive, consistently being able to get into the points, but not being able to progress to the top 5. Well, his podium in the first race of 2020, thanks to one of the best final laps you will ever see, was a brilliant moment for Lando. With 4 podiums in 2021, it looked like Lando could soon be making the step forward to race at the front. He even had the chance to win a race leading the Russian Grand Prix in 2021, until rain ruined his race. Lando was also a major part of McLaren's best result of the last decade, finishing second behind Daniel Ricciardo in Monza in 2021. There were expectations for the Aussie driver to be faster than Norris, but Lando's results over the last couple of years look even more impressive when you see how much Daniel has struggled. Things have kind of stalled for the Brits since. Norris only had 1 podium in 2022, and Lando dropped to 7th in the drivers' standings. McLaren have not made the step forward that they were looking for. With rookie Oscar Piastri driving alongside Norris for 2023, there was no doubt that Norris was the team's first driver this season. That meant that the expectations were high for this year, but things started out pretty much as poorly as possible. Having looked slow in testing, they could not have had a worse first race of the season. Oscar had to retire with electrical issues, while Lando finished last out of the cars still running. With 15th and 17th in the next race, it looked like 2023 was going to be a horrible year for McLaren, as the car lacked a lot of pace. McLaren had shown solid pace in qualifying for both races, but the car was the slowest on the grid when it came to the race. This was not the start of the season the team were looking for, and it was hurt even more by the fact that midfield team Aston Martin had taken the steps forward they were hoping to take. There was even talk at the start of the season about Lando Norris potentially looking for a move elsewhere if McLaren's poor pace continued. Thankfully for the McLaren team, things turned around pretty quickly, and I don't think that Lando is going anywhere anytime soon. While rookie Oscar Piastri has been impressive in his first season, there is no doubt that Lando Norris is the man leading McLaren's charge back up the grid. After 2 horrific races to begin the season, Lando benefited from some issues further up the grid to finish 6th in Australia, while Piastri finished 8th in his home race. Lando finished 9th in Baku and Monaco, showing his brilliance on street circuits, particularly with the lack of retirements in both of those races. The entire team struggled again in both Spain and Canada, with Norris making contact with his countryman Lewis Hamilton on the first lap in Spain. But back on track where he claimed his first podium, Lando was again showing brilliant pace in the McLaren, putting his car 4th on the grid. He was just 2.5 tenths off the pace of championship frontrunner Max Verstappen, which is incredibly impressive. Being able to keep your car on the track might seem like the minimum for Formula 1 drivers, but Norris being able to avoid any penalties for track limits meant he finished 4th, a phenomenal result. It's not rare for Formula 1 teams to bring in upgrades at their home race. For McLaren, they just had to drive the new parts from the factory in Woking to Silverstone for race day, instead of flying them across the world. On a track that was changing quickly, it was unclear as to whether McLaren would really be able to see if the upgrades had worked at all. Well, thankfully, both drivers nailed qualifying. Norris was particularly impressive, setting the fastest time in Q1 before ending up on the front row, just a couple of tenths behind Max Verstappen. Oscar Piastri was just a 10th behind his teammate and put his car 3rd. That is an incredible result for McLaren that they were able to convert into massive points on Sunday. Lando was able to handle a late safety car and even challenge Verstappen at the start. We really saw McLaren leading the British Grand Prix, even if it was only for a few laps at the start. McLaren gained 30 points, which is a lot when you consider that in the first 9 races, they were only able to collect 29. So what is it that is powering this McLaren comeback? The simple answer to how McLaren have been able to turn their season around is upgrades. While there was speculation that the upgrades would be brought into the car gradually, the McLaren looked very different in Austria. The team brought some massive changes to the floor and side pod of the car, which were all aimed at changing the aerodynamics of the car. At the start of the season, the team really struggled with a lack of top speed because the car had a huge amount of drag. It's one of the main reasons they did so poorly in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Well, the upgrades looked at reducing some of that drag, which had hurt the team on the straights, and that certainly seemed to work. Austria is a track where if you don't have good acceleration and straight line speed, you're going to be towards the back of the grid. Well, the McLarens clearly had very good straight line speed, because Lando was able to secure 4th place. That drag seemed to have improved their cornering quite a bit, with the McLaren going well around Silverstone circuit. But can this form continue, and how important is Lando Norris to McLaren's comeback? It is very difficult to predict where McLaren will go next because of how quickly they've shot up the leaderboards. This was not really a steady progress, with McLaren jumping towards the front of the grid pretty much out of nowhere in Silverstone. It's also tough to figure out whether McLaren can continue this form. We know that a big reason for their current performances is the upgrades that they brought in across the last 2 weeks. Well, they can't bring in more upgrades every week, so the McLaren can't keep getting faster. There is also the risk that McLaren's upgrades were suited to the unique track of Silverstone. The British Grand Prix is full of high-speed turns that don't really test the car in the same way that slow corners do. In Hungary, the McLaren will need to deal with a lot more slower corners, which it might not be suited for. We'll have to wait and see how the car reacts to different tracks moving forward. There is also the likelihood that drivers like Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton will be much improved in future qualifying sessions. But if McLaren does have the pace, then there is one man who will decide the team's fortunes: Lando Norris. I think if you ask any Formula 1 analyst, they'll tell you that Lando Norris is a future world champion, as he was originally seen as one of the best prospects in F1 history when he was brought into the McLaren team. What makes Lando so good is that he has brilliant pace both over one lap and in the race. It's rare that we see Lando going backwards in the field. He's going to get the most out of any car, and McLaren will know he can take them to the podium with a good car underneath him. The other thing that McLaren will rely on is for Lando to have as few mistakes as possible. Despite coming into the sport at a very early age, Lando is not really known for making many errors. With Oscar Piastri still trying to get used to the Formula 1 seat he's in, Lando is going to need to be as perfect as possible. McLaren don't really have anything to worry about. Lando Norris has consistently been able to get the very best out of the car they've given him. If Zak Brown's team can continue to show the pace they did at Silverstone, there's no doubt that Lando Norris could be the first non-Red Bull driver to stand on the top step of the podium this season. But what do you think? Are McLaren really back, and if so, can Lando Norris take them to more race wins? Why not put your thoughts in the comments down below? While you're down there, why not hit the like button and subscribe? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.